BeTheTalk, episode 153, featuring Tayo Rockson. Welcome to BeTheTalk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with Tayo Rockson. Tayo, are you ready to talk?
I am indeed. Thank you for having me on.
Tayo Rockson is a storyteller, cultural translator, and brand strategist for changemakers on a mission to use his difference to make a difference. Tayo has been named top 40 Millennial Influencer by New Theory and is also a 3-time TEDx speaker, a president, CEO of UYD Management, and the host of the podcast As Told by Nomads. Tayo Rockson, welcome to the talk.
Thank you so much for having me, and it's a pleasure to be on here. Thanks. You've done a great job of curating a bunch of speakers all over the world, so I'm always eager to be surrounded by such good company.
Tayo, I'm just trying to use my difference to make a difference.
Yes, keep saying that. Yes.
Hey, that's Tayo's tagline that I'm already stealing from him.
Hey, steal away.
His TEDx talk, one of them that we're going to start out talking about today is called Learn the Differences to Find the Commonalities. And he has 3 ways to be able to practice diplomacy. Actually, that's not the title. That is my top takeaway from your talk.
Yeah.
His talk is called, too many notes on my end. It's called The Art of Diplomacy. Yes. He talks about 3 ways to learn the differences to find the commonality. I'm going to summarize them so that we can go even deeper in a short amount of time we have. Number 1, gather information. Number 2, become an active listener. And number 3, to become an active member of your community. Tayo Rockson, please take us behind the talk, The Art of Diplomacy.
Absolutely. So for this particular talk, you mentioned I had done 3 talks. So last year, this all happened last year, and this happened right
in
after.
A year. I think you did 3 TED Talks in a year.
Yeah. It kind of happened. I mean, you got to look at the climate of the world we live in, and a lot of the work I do. I run a diversity and inclusion company, so a lot of what I do is teaching leaders and people, thought leaders, how to communicate their messages across culture. And we've got the election, we've got Brexit, we've got all these things going on. So there was a lot of, it was really in the air. It was ripe for that. But I had pitched a bunch of organizations. I reached out to a bunch of TEDx organizations, and I identified the ones in my area, New York City, and I just planned about 4 to 5 months ahead of time. The ones that were happening in April, May. I started that in January, and I just started reaching out, found out what the contact information was, and I was like, okay, what I'm going to do is, some of them had themes, some of them didn't have themes. And I was like, okay, this is who I am. This is what I've done, and this is what I can talk to. And I sent them a link to some of my stuff on my podcast, and a lot of them didn't respond. Some did, and then I followed up. And this is when some started to respond. So I followed up about 1 or 2 times, and then on the second time I followed up, one said, "Hey, sorry, we were on a break. We checked you out. We would love to have you." And then the other, same thing when I followed up, they just said, "Hey, you're in. We forgot to notify you." And so it happened a lot like that. So those were the 2. And then the third one that happened was they actually approached me. It was TEDx L'Oreal, so it was an internal TEDx. And this was the first time L'Oreal, the company itself, was doing a TEDx. And they were doing the global talk, and they had heard about me through my work, my podcast, and word of mouth, and said, "Hey, we really would like you to be on one of the speakers in our inaugural TEDx." But to take it back, I know I was going all the way, but to answer your question, this particular talk, I really thought about my dad. I grew up as a diplomatic kid. I'm a Nigerian. I grew up in 5 countries and 4 continents. And as I was approaching this talk, the theme for this was one, meaning how do we get people to have unity? And I kept thinking about what it was like for my dad when he kept moving to different parts of the world and what I was learning from him, how he would maintain relationships internationally, locally, and come back and forth. And then I kept thinking about what I was experiencing during that time, because ultimately that's what led to my career. And I just codified everything. And I went back in time, and the first thing was, learn how to collect and gather information. And that was what I was doing. When I was in a new environment, I needed to know how to collect and gather information. And I also compared that to the world today. A lot of people make decisions without collecting and gathering information. They don't know what they're
expensive decisions.
Yeah, expensive decisions. Even if you look at there's a rule called the gag rule, and no matter where you fall on abortion or not, it sort of basically silences aid for people that that might provide abortion, I don't know, pills or any of that. And the thing that they don't understand is that some of these funding actually helps with the contraceptives and the HIV and the malaria and all that. So taking away funding just actually limits a whole bunch of opportunities for a lot of people in countries that have come to depend on this. And so that's the type of policy where you have only one piece of information but not the whole information. So I looked at that. My dad would learn how to collect and gather information because his job as a diplomat is to be a liaison between Nigeria and the country we're supposed to. And then being an active listener, something again that we don't always do. We think we listen, we might hear something, but we don't listen to something. And active listening really involves like listening to learn, listen to evaluate, and listen to understand. And so I was just thinking about what I did and what my dad did. And the last thing was being an active member of your community. And for me to build the career that I built today, I needed to really, be part of the community. For me to know how to be a Nigerian that sort of existed in every part of the world, where people would, wonder who I was or why I was able to adapt, I needed to be part of that community. And I just extrapolated those things, turned that into a talk. It was a lot longer when I first wrote it, but then you have the time limit with the TEDx, and I was like, okay, this is how I feel like an audience will get something out of it. My main goal was I want an audience I always have speech answer two questions, so what and now what. So I wanted the audience to know what the so what was, what I was doing, why it was important. Obviously, we live in this time. We need to know how to be to communicate messages with diplomacy. And then the now what. I wanted them to have active, actionable tips. So you know how to collect and gather information, you know how to listen, and you know how to be an active member of your community. And that's essentially what the speech became.
Talk Universe, we are rocking and rolling with the sound bites today with Tayo. My gosh. So the now what for the so what.
Now what.
The so what for the now what. Love it.
Every talk has to answer so what and now what.
Now, I mean, you could say that same thing. It could take you about 8 or 9 minutes to say what it says in about a second. I love it.
Yeah.
Well, yeah. And so we'll just unpack that a little bit. It's like, what's the current state of affairs, and now what are you going to do with it? And that call to action is always so important to have. Tayo, I love talking to diplomats. I love talking to children of diplomats. I was at a dinner last week talking with a woman from Malawi whose father was also a diplomat. And so, I mean, it just makes for great conversations, great interviews, all of that. I think it's because you have so many perspectives, and you have, I would imagine you have that kind of tolerant understanding of, doing all the things that you describe in this talk, gathering the information, not rendering a premature judgment, finding a very socially sensitive way to then make a decision and add the most value for the most people. What would you say, in addition to that, or even in your own words, is one of the primary advantages that kind of upbringing brought you? And maybe what are some of the downsides? What are some of the challenges that we might be blind to as well?
Sure, I'll start off with the challenges. Initially, I definitely went through this. I had an identity crisis. There were moments when I was, I remember I was this skinny Nigerian kid with a thick Nigerian accent in a French-speaking country in an American international school going through puberty, right? That was my 10-year-old experience. And ultimately, I always say it's way more positive. I prefer to have had the childhood I had, but I definitely had moments where I felt inferior, and I was like, a lot of times this is the first time I was seeing people that look differently from me, and I started to have this weird narrative in my head that I was less than, and even though my mom would try and encourage me to be like, no, it's okay. It really wasn't, it didn't necessarily work, but I needed to learn how to love myself and know how to adapt. Right. And so that's why even this talk for me, it's become my most popular talk, but it's something that it's like, it's like easily one of my favorites because it's really from a moment of pain, I was able to figure out how to connect and understand that, okay, this was my new reality. I was now going to be a minority everywhere I went. Even when I went back to Nigeria, I wasn't the typical Nigerian anymore. So I needed to figure out how to adapt and exist with that world. So to switch to the advantages, adaptability becomes your superpower, because you know there's this thing, say you code switch, you learn how to sort of exist between different worlds, but you also have that added perspective, like you pointed out. You can get to see things from a different perspective, and that perspective enriches your experience because you can then play an educator to many parts, right? You know, some people can only talk about things from one perspective, and if you educate them on another perspective, that's great. And even if you don't know the perspective, just you having a habit of being open-minded is a good habit to have, because then you can invite different forms of dialogue. So that was that, and so those are the downfalls and the upsides of that.
Well, Tayo, I love that you took it that way, because I think it's really true. I mean, I had a pretty, looking back on it by modern day standards, I had a really privileged, advantaged upbringing. And unfortunately for me, I was so aware of the class differences in my rural area growing up that I really I went the other direction. Not to speak of myself too much, but it's real easy when you have some privileges and advantages to take that and then feel kind of a sense of guilt instead of learning how to switch, learning how to adapt, learning how to harvest the good and still be able to, as you mentioned, code switch so that you're able to fit in and blend in without sticking out, and so that you can empower other people, educate other people. You mentioned being able to educate and teach other people. I know that doesn't happen automatically unless you can first relate to them and be accepted by them. So you figured, that out very brilliantly. Anything you'd add to that?
No, I mean, yes. So the one thing I'll add is the key to inclusion, right? What I did today is really making people feel seen, heard, and understood, right? So in anything, the through line to the talk that we're talking about here was, I said, understand the differences around you and find the similarities within them. And that was the through line to even all the 3 tips I did. And that's all it is about. At our core, we're all humans, but we all have equally as good alternatives. And I think when we start learning how to humanize people and say, this is my way, but that could be another way as well. And we say it's an equally as good alternative. It's just maybe not my way. But still, because it's an equally as good alternative, I'm willing to, just get out of my head of that ethnocentric mindset. But yeah, it's just make sure you let people be seen, heard, and understood, and you be good.
Tayo Rockson with yet another soundbite. Diversity and inclusion is just about helping other people feel seen, heard, and understood. I love it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
You've just demystified this whole thing for all of us, dominant cultural types like myself.
This is why I love the world. I mean, for some people it might be a bit of a burden, but for me, I feel like it's a calling because I almost feel like I was placed on this earth for that. I mean, I grew up in 2 military dictatorships, so I was sort of born in this, and I just always wanted to solve that type of behavior. So yeah, that's what it is, really.
We've been enjoying a great talk with Tayo Rockson, and we are about to be right back with the Blitz Round. People ask, how could I start a 7-day-a-week podcast? It's because of what I've learned from my mentors. Some of the best mentors in history aren't around anymore. They've left hours of one-on-one mentoring behind in their books. Each month at Classics on Tap, I record a new chapter from a classic business book to help you make a difference. Download your first chapter at classicsontap.com. And we're back with the Blitz Round with Tayo Rockson. Tayo, are you ready?
I am. Bring it on.
All right, I'm bringing it on, and these are a bunch of either-or questions related to the preparation and performance of your talk. Question number 1, were you selected or did you apply to speak?
I applied.
For all 3, or were you invited for that?
I applied to 2 selected.
I'm just going to broaden it because you've done 3 of these, so we want to encompass all the 3.
I applied to 2, and I was selected to 1. And a funny story. I know this is wrapping around, but quick story. So when I applied to the 1, I had applied I thought I was going to speak on the same topic. So I applied to like 10 or TEDx with the same topic. And then 8 didn't respond, and 2 that responded said yes to the same topic. So I had to switch. Change one of my topics last minute. And that's how I came up with the art of diplomacy. The first talk was how to be an inclusive leader, and then the second one. So I quickly thought about that. But yes, I applied to 2 and I was selected for 1.
So I'm really glad we've been focusing on the most recent one, frankly, because you've had so much super processing that I would imagine by the time you did the second and then now the third, I mean, I shouldn't be surprised at the sound bites, because Talk Universe, this is what I know. This is a blitz round, but this is what the process forces you to soundbite your thinking, yes, so that you can impact people in milliseconds instead of minutes. And when you can do that, you listen to what the person's saying. So, all right, question number 2, moving on. Are you a memorizer, an improviser, or a blender? Blended, for sure. All right. And did you have nerves, or were you in the zone, or neither, or both?
Yes, I had nerves for all 3. Interesting. I speak once a week, but I had nerves for all 3. And the highest amount of nerves I had was for this particular talk, because this had the most highest audience. But it was also because I had to switch the topic. But yes, I had some nerves. And nerves and excitement are usually the same emotion. It's just how you channel them.
Are you the type of person you just press into that nervous feeling and you're happy for it and you're thankful and you just crush it and come out the other side?
Yeah, no. I always say healthy nerves. I practice and process those. Always grateful for them. And it's, if I'm not nervous, I know something might not be there. But I've actually, for the most part, I don't get nervous because I speak about once a week. But for these particular ones, just because I knew of the audience, I was more nervous than normal. But it wasn't a crippling nerve.
Yeah, and maybe we should reframe this. It's all in the words. So are we nervous, or are we excited and privileged and lucky and going to go out there and crush it? But I'm the one asking the question, so I started you out on that path. So in all fairness, all right. Cut for time question. What was the most painful part of any of your talks for you to have to cut out?
Wow, wasn't ready for this. Okay, most painful part was they always say get rid of your darlings. There were some stories that I had growing up, especially during my high school years, that I had to cut out because even though they would have served the theme, it was repetitive. I just liked the idea of the story being there because I was like, oh, maybe I'll go for a laugh there. But I had to cut it out because I felt like I had set up the story, I set up the premise, and I was speaking through the lens of my dad. And if I put myself in there too much, I was taken away from that. So yeah, that was that.
Great awareness. What is a tip, a technique, or a tool that helps you?
A tip, I have wisdom journals. So essentially what I call a wisdom journal is every day, every time I have a moment of insight, a moment of thought, if I'm over here in a conversation or someone says something to me that sparks an idea, I write it out on my Evernote on my phone. You can sync it anywhere. And I just write out whatever that thing, if it's a sentence, and I'll just flesh it out. And I might flesh it out then, or I might flesh it out later at night. But that gets me in the habit of learning how to translate thoughts, use analogies, use metaphors and things like that. And doing that process, it's sort of my creative outlet, and it often turns to speeches and or blog posts. So yeah, I just write daily wisdom journals.
Yeah, well, I love you mentioned the Evernote, so I'm going to show everybody on Facebook Live who's watching the Facebook Live right here. I've got my phone app right now, and it's just amazing. The day that I realized I could go from thinking on my laptop to thinking when I'm walking down the street, plug it in the phone, and it's right there back on the laptop. I said, this is amazing.
Yeah. No, it's the same thing. And I do it on the, I'm in New York, so I'm on the subway and anything. And even when I'm listening to an audiobook, I read a lot, or I listen to a lot of books as well. I just boom, sentences and that. So that's what I do, and then that's what a talker is. So yeah.
Yeah. Well, so we know talking is about performing. So Tayo, what's the most unexpected, strange, or just plain weird thing that happened during or before any of your talks?
Wow, unexpected or strange thing. Oh man, I mean, I've had people. This is cliche, but stuff doesn't work out. Like the computer is broken or the laptop is dead. So I had to happen once or twice, and then I told myself that I will always know exactly what I'm talking about, regardless. Some people use slides for crutches, and I'm almost too much on the other side where I don't even necessarily use slides as much, but I'm coming back to the middle because as I speak in more organizations and schools, sometimes schools want that. But I've had people like minutes before the event just come tell me the projector's broken. You're going to have to do this, or cut your speech by 15 minutes, or can you also MC? And I'm like, whoa. So yeah, just unexpected things like that where.
Wait a second. Could you also MC?
Yeah.
At one of your TED Talks?
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. No.
So, I've had that, and, I'm a team player. It wasn't hard, but, it just wasn't my mindset at the time. So it was not a big deal at the time, but, so those things have happened, and, just battle tested. So
Talk Universe, my advice to you, if you're given a talk somewhere and they come up to you and also ask you to also MC, there's a 2-letter word that starts with an N that you want to use in that moment. I can't believe. All right. So, well, we've been having a really fun blitz round with Tayo Rockson. In a moment, we're going to be back with the final word of advice. But before that, I want to talk with you about where you can go to check out his excellent talk. Actually, all three. We're going to have links to all three in the show notes at BeTheTalk.com. The one that we're talking the most about today is The Art of Diplomacy. You can also find out more about Tayo Rockson at Tayo, Tayo, Rockson.com, Tayo Rockson.com. And heck, I'll even put a link to that. You can check out his podcast from that website, I'm sure. And we're going to be back in just one moment with the final word of advice. Everyone wants to change the world, but not everyone knows the first step. Before you can change the world with your talk, it has to be selected. So grab the templates, timelines, and tools that I use to get my talk selected at BeTheTalk.com. And we're back with Tayo Rockson and the final word of advice for Talk Universe.
All right, here you go. So I want you to know that people don't hire speakers. They hire problem solvers who know how to talk. And so whenever you're on stage, think of yourself as a guide. You helping them go from a current condition to a desired destination. Think about that, and then you have a great time as a speaker.
Tayo Rockson, thanks so much for coming on the talk today, sharing your triple TEDx speaker knowledge with Talk Universe.
Thank you. The pleasure is mine. Thank you for having me on.
Thanks for listening to Be The Talk. For tips and resources to help you change the world, go to BeTheTalk.com. See you tomorrow.